What are the best artifacts to use for every unit types in Call of Dragons? That is exactly what we're going to find out in today's video. I'm going to go over every artifact that is generally seen as the best in slot for every type of hero, as well as every type of unit, so magic, cav, infantry, as well as marksman. And we're going to go over the best ones basically as a tier list, so which ones you should focus on, whether it's a legendary or an epic artifact. So first, mages. Mages is a quite simple one. Phoenix Eye is seen as by far the best artifact in the game for any mage marches. Of course, it has attack here. Attack here is always wanted, especially for PvE content like behemoth fights, because defense and HP don't really matter, because if you get hit in those fights, you usually kind of like die or lose a lot of HP, as opposed to where you're able to avoid it, and then you will be focusing on attack so that you can do as much damage as possible to beat the timer. So this is going to be the same for every artifact. Obviously in PvP it differs, but it's still really one of the best stats you can have. Now, this one is the best for mages because it has the impact of doing 4 targets up to 5 eventually, and doing 2,000 to 4,000 damage. So skill damage factor, a skill damage factor of a hero is usually like 1,200 to like 1,500. So this is like more damage than any heroes in the game's abilities. And then it can be almost 3 times more damage, which is absolutely incredible. Hitting 4 to 5 targets, there's nothing like it. It is by far the best. There's nothing close to it. It's amazing. Now, of course, it's a legendary. It has, RNG. Not everybody has that. So that is why there's also the Infernal Flame that is, like, let's say, second best. This one can be gotten as well from the chest, but there is a special event that has this one as the reward. So there is a higher chance of getting it if you are, especially a spender. If you're saving up for a while, you'll be able to then focus on trying to get this one as your shot if you are really looking for a mage artifact. Again, attack, very good. Now, this one does not do as much damage because instead of being an AoE damage, it is basically going to be an effect that does more magic damage every auto attack that you do, like normal attack. So for 3 seconds, your normal attacks will then hit for additional 1,000 damage factor. It goes up to much higher than that, but it's very, very strong. It's just 1 target damage, so it's not as good. It does have a 15% attack for 5 seconds buff, which is really good, especially for Lilia, because she does inflict Scorch on enemies. So this is very, very strong, just not as good, not as much AoE damage potential as the other one. Next, we have the Magic Bomb. Of course, this is the epic quality, and 95% of players will have this within a few weeks of playing the game, because it is not that rare to find epic. You'll have every epic in the game within the first season for sure, even if you're free to play. So again, this one has attack, which is one of the reasons why it's so good. And this one drops a bomb and damages 3 nearby legions. So of course, it's pretty good. 1,500 damage factor, all the way up to 1,800 if you have it max, which, I can max it myself. So there you go. It does less damage per additional target, but that's the same for all of these artifacts. But, as an epic, it's very, very much the best choice you can have for an offensive mage march. Now, every other mage artifact out there is still decent. We have mostly support items. So the Theo Arbon, provides defense, not as offensive, as well as heals target. Very, very good to bring in team fighting, PvP, open field. Not as good for PvE behemoths, and obviously just not as good for doing damage, especially if you're doing like the Dragon Trail and stuff like that. So this is the kind of thing that you bring on your secondary march, your healing march, your support marches. Same goes for, items like this. This is a teleportation item, 8-hour cooldown. So this is a very single use. It's very good because you can teleport to nearby friendly legion to basically anywhere within Alliance territory. So you can go from zone 1 to like the last zone in the late games and stuff. Very situational, not bad. Of course, this one is not bad because it does have attack here, but it doesn't do anything for enemy players. It works on Behemoth, so you can do a 2,000 damage factor to 1 target. The damage factor goes up to 2,800. But it's really good for PvE stuff because you can target behemoths and darklings and all kind of stuff, but otherwise it has no use at all. So this is something that's fine to bring for behemoths only, but do not bring this in PvP because this won't work on players. So you're just getting the buff and no ability, and it's really just not as good. You'd rather off use a support item at that point. Other items to mention, the Freezing Ring, basically making you immune to damage for 6 seconds, and then you slow enemies afterwards, as well as the Spirit Bangle, which removes debuff. Again, very, very situational. So these are to be used really by support marches that you are bringing a secondary with less troops, for example, or just because you're trying to buff your wells and stuff in PvP. There really isn't any other reason to use those unless you specifically know what you're doing, because it's not going to have, 9-minute cooldown and stuff. It's just not as good as using an offensive one and having your mage just do as much damage as possible. Now, next, we're talking about Cavalry Artifact, which one of the best Cavalry artifacts. Kingslayer is number one, S+++++. There is nothing close to it. It is amazing. Of course, it has attack, and it does 5 enemy target, 1800 damage at level 1. So again, it's very, very strong. 5 enemies is a lot of people to be doing this much damage to, and then if you ever level it up, it'll be even higher than that. So, you know, it's incredible. Also, the rage cost is not that high compared to a lot of other artifacts. And next, Soren's Blade. It's not far. It's pretty damn good. It has less attack because it has march speed, which is very good in PvP, especially on Cav March, of course. But it does damage to 2 targets only. And that's it, right? So 2 targets is really not bad, but it is, you know, just not as good as 5 targets. It does give your Legion 20% march speed, which is decent. It's basically just like a less good version. It is a more move speed oriented item. So very good. Just, you know, not as much damage potential as Kingslayer. Now next, if you do not have any of the legendaries like me, Centaur's Bow, again, is the epic of choice. It is really the only cavalry epic item that's good. It gives defense, which is a bummer for PvE content. But in PvP, because you're attacking a lot of people, this will not be as bad as people think. It is also going to do 1500 damage to 3 enemies in a circle, which is, you know, very decent amount of damage. 1500 is the max at level 5, so, you know, it's really low damage compared to the legendary ones, but doing it on 3 enemies, and it's still a very decent amount of damage. It's the same as Emrys skill ability, for example, who does also 1500. So, you know, nothing to laugh at. Definitely the one to use if you don't have the legendary ones. And again, an epic one, most people will have access to this one quite early on in the game. If by some weird stroke of luck you do not have it, you can also do the Bone Cleaver, which is, you know, a little bit of damage to 1 target. It does more damage if you are full HP, like higher than 50% HP. It gives attack and defense, so the stats are really not that bad. There's, you know, nothing wrong with it other than the fact that it's blue, so it has less stats and less power. So, you know, it's something good to use if you have it, of course, but I would really go and try and get the epic one at least. Now, in the other category of like fun artifacts, Storm Arrows is probably one of the best because it has attack here, which is again very good. Its ability is a teleport for like a 15 range, so, you know, not that far, but it's very good, especially in PvP, even in behemoth fights if you're avoiding some kind of damage and stuff. And it does give you 12% damage for 4 seconds afterwards, so nothing wrong with it, just obviously not as much damage as the other choices. Now next, Marksman. Marksmen are, you know, one of the best PvE units in the game, as they do a lot of damage, and they also have one of the best artifacts in the game, which is the Shadow Blades. Shadow Blades attack here, which is what we want. This is 5 enemy take 1800 damage. So this is again very good. It is the best artifact that you can be using, especially for PvP, as you know, it is a PvP artifact. The rage cost is 1200, which is a bit higher than like the Cav one, for example, but still doesn't matter. This is huge damage in AoE to 5 marches, and this is obviously at level 1. It goes much higher than this. So, you know, very good. If you have this, it is the go-to. It is the best you can use in PvE and PvP both. Now, next, we have the Violet's Bow. Very similar. It is a 5 enemy in a rectangle, and you do 1600 damage factor, which also makes it so that the enemies cannot cast artifact skill for 10 seconds. So this is very fun and very powerful in PvP. It is less damage than the Shadow Blades, but it has a fun effect. And it has the same rage cost and everything. The difference being that there's unit HP here instead of attack. So less of an offensive, you'll do less damage. HP isn't bad on Marksman, but Marksman and Mages attacking from afar means that most of the damage that they take is going to be counter-attack damage or, you know, abilities and stuff like that. So HP and defense just not as good in my opinion when you want to do as much damage as possible to enemies. You know, there's nothing wrong with these stats in PvP, but in PvE, again, they're quite wasted. So this is why this one wouldn't be the best one, for example, as much as something that gives attack and does a lot of damage on top of it. Now, Heart of Kamasi is another Marksman artifact. Now, this one is more of a support one. It has defense, which again is not what you love in PvE, but in PvP has its place. But this one is basically a buff. 15% physical attack and 15% normal attacks dealt for 10 seconds. So this is a very massive buff. It's very strong. This artifact is very powerful. There's nothing wrong with it. But of course, it's a very, you know, a buffing defensive artifact. So it's not going to be the best to do damage. In behemoth fights, wouldn't be amazing either. As much as this buff is great, it lasts 10 seconds and it has a 1.5 minute cooldown. And, you know, it can be seen good if you're going to have a lot of people around you that have high damage. This can be good to buff them. but I would not recommend people with strong marches to be using this. This would be more for a support archer march if you have it. You know, someone who has a free-to-play or a low-spender account uses this to boost people who have pay-to-win accounts with other artifacts. In my opinion, you'd be better off using the Heart Piercer if you're trying to damage, because it has so much attack here, as you can see, as well as this is a lot of damage. 2000 damage factor, it's one target, but it's huge. It's a lot of damage, and also has a chance to remove 15% physical defense, which is very, very powerful. So this, in my opinion, you know, if you don't have any of the legendary, this is the go-to. It is what will provide you the most damage and is going to be the best in PvP because you have all that burst. And 2000 is the highest, basically, when you have a level 5. But, you know, this is very, very powerful. I would really see, if you don't have anything legendary, this is the one you go for. And, of course, if you don't have any luck and you're very early in your season, you can always use the rapid crossbow. But, you know, the epic ones are almost guaranteed to be unlockable within a few months of playing this game, a few weeks, because it's just, you know, you get a lot of keys from this game for free. So, you know, I wouldn't spend too much time on this one. The damage is, you know, pretty low. It's not bad. It's just not as good. So you definitely just don't focus on blue ones if you can avoid it. They're really just there for the early game and nothing else. Last, we have Infantry. Infantry is a particular one to talk about because Infantry, you can do decent damage, but Infantry really exists in this game to be tanks. Block Cavalry unit mostly, as well as just block the path to protect your ranged units and just tank as much damage while the other units are doing their job. So in that instance, Dragon Scale Armor is most definitely the best artifact, especially for that role. It gives HP, which is what you want in this situation, especially even in behemoths. You know, infantry are usually going to be the tank. You only need 1 or 2 tanks for most fights, though, so you don't need everybody to have this. Just your main whale tank, which is going to be the one who's tanking the boss. This is amazing, of course. It gives like again HP, and then this gives a shield as well as a tree friendly legion. The shield is 2200 for 10 seconds, which is very, very high, as well as gives 10% attack. So this is just very, very good. Obviously, there's nothing bad with this. It just protects your allies, protects yourself, gives a buff to your ally, gives you HP. This also can grant your troops 9% less damage taken for 5 seconds, range damage taken. So, you know, another buff. Just everything about this is good, of course, and it is really the tankiest item you can get for your infantry march. Now, if you are more of the offensive type and you want to do damage with infantry, this Springs of Silence obviously has attack and has an ability that deals damage in an arc of 3 enemies. As you can see, it's a lot of damage in front, 1600 damage, and it slows enemy by 20%. So a very basic damage dealing item, very, very strong, gives attack. It is not usually the rule of infantry, but you can't really go wrong using something like this either. We also have the Greymer's Warhammer, which is defense. So again, this is very good for infantry. Defense is another stat that you like. And it deals damage to basically 4 surrounding enemy legions, so very close to you. 1600 damage times 4, you know, and also damage targets are stunned for 2 seconds, which can only be activated every 10 seconds, which doesn't matter because this is a 130 cooldown. But if more than one player has this artifact, it's basically, you can stun log them. But, you know, very, very powerful, of course. Stunning is incredibly powerful in this game, and will, like you see here, it will let you go away, as well as, you know, stun everybody and damage them for a good amount of damage. So, you know, this is very, very good. In PvP, I would say this is probably one of the best artifacts there is because of the stun effect. It is insane, it does a lot of damage and gives defense. So this is everything you want from infantry. Control and defense is hard to beat. But of course, all the infantry artifacts are good, so it's really, there's not much that's better. It will be just more situational. You can do more damage, you can do more CC. It really depends on what your role is, how strong your account is, and what you're trying to accomplish in the certain fight that you're in. Now, last for the legendary artifacts for infantry, this is again another very strong offensive one. It has attack, and it has a special ability here that basically is a high damage factor on 1 target. And it's pretty high damage. But if this skill defeats the target, which means they die, you also gain physical attack 16%. If it does not defeat the target, instead they bleed out for X amount of damage, which is like 150 every second for 3 seconds. So this is, you know, very decent, but this is 1 target. So it's going to be a big burst and then a little bit of bleeding damage, or a big burst and a buff for a very short amount of time. So this is, you know, out of the 4 legendary, I would say it's probably the least good one, but it's still like an A+ tier artifact. It's still very, very good. It's just because it's single target and provides only offensive. It's definitely not the most matched to infantry in the game, but it is definitely not bad at all either. Now this next one, the Fang of Ashkari, this is not for infantry specifically, but it gives basically just Legion defense buff, so this does work on the infantry, and it is most definitely a tank item meant for at least most infantries. But you know, the effect is basically AoE damage around you. 4 Legion, deal damage every 2 seconds, it lasts for 8 seconds, so you do 4 times 500 damage factor. It can go up to 1000 damage factor, so this is still very decent, but it is, you know, very concentrated in melee around you. It gives defense and does damage, so it's a bit contradicting, but it works very well. It's a very good tank item. It works very well for infantry. It works for literally anyone, but if you were going to put this on anyone, infantry would be it. So, you know, a very good defensive, tanky, a little bit of damage. It is definitely something that I would consider using, and I'm using it myself on my infantry march. Now, of course, these are all legendaries. There's a lot of legendary for infantry, which means there's a chance that you're going to get one eventually. But if you don't, again, the epic is the Butcher's Blade would be the best choice. This is offensive. Infantry, PvP, you know, has attack here. This is basically another version of all the other ones. It does an arc damage in front for 550 up to 3 targets. This can go up to 900, and that's about it. It just deals damage. It's very good, very basic. It's just not as powerful as the other ones. But as far as epic goes, there's nothing wrong with this one. And if you don't have the legendary ones, definitely go for this one. You're going to do some nice damage with that for sure. Now, if you don't have epics yet, in terms of elite for infantry, this is the only real viable choice. It gives attack and it's fine, and this basically is a buff of 50% normal attack damage dealt. Now, infantries are not high damage dealers because they're tanks, but this is decent. It does the job. But another mention here would be probably better, actually, the Harlequin Mask. This is obviously more for PvE because it is obviously defense, which is great, but this basically taunts enemies. So this is a very special item in the game that you will see people use a lot because it is basically what gives the tanks a taunt ability in order to make sure that the big bosses are attacking them. So this is going to be something that is to keep in mind and will be used a lot. It is really one of the best artifacts in the game. It's just sad that it's an elite that has pretty bad stats, and obviously doesn't work on enemy players. So this is not something you're going to bring in PvP, but it is still something that if you are trying to play infantry, you will most definitely need to use in some behemoth fights because infantry players will be using this many times. Now, that's about it for artifacts for the 4 different unit types in this game. Of course, there's also artifacts of many different kinds that do fun things. For example, this is an engineering artifact, which is amazing. By the way, if you are doing anything engineering related, use infantry units. They have more engineering points as a unit type, which means that they will build a lot faster than any other Cavs, Marksmen, or Mages, for example. Like, infantry are the building engineering unit type by default. As well as, you know, things like this, Cloak of Stealth. This is for Cav. Very good. Basically, you're stealth for X amount of time. You move a bit slower, but it lasts for very long time. And you can go between enemies and then just appear behind their marches of archers and mages. So there's a lot of things like this in this game that will really make the gameplay very fun and very exciting. There's, you know, this one that basically teleports you back to your city, so you can do some crazy things very far away and then teleport back to your city without having to wait for 45 minutes march time kind of thing. You know, even mobility ones like this one, which is very strong when you want mobility, or you can bring this on a extra march that you don't use, but you just buff all your other march for this buff because it is AoE for everybody. So, you know, there's a lot of fun things in this game, a lot of artifacts, a lot of gameplay. There's, you know, garrison artifacts as well as rally artifacts, which can be decent, but in my opinion, if you're going to rally, for example, with a full carve march, you're going to most likely use a cav artifact than a rally artifact like this. But this is also, you know, it also is valuable, but this is going to be the kind of stuff that you keep for wells, as most players won't be touching this kind of stuff at all. And then you also have something with flying. This is the only flying artifact that I've seen so far, and it is absolutely amazing for flying units if you do have this, but it is a tanky thing, which basically grants shields to nearby enemies, and then grants a stack of Mark of Judgment, meaning that when you have 10 times this stack, you will trigger Supreme Judgment and clear all Mark of Judgment, which will deal damage. It's a pretty crazy artifact, but, you know, this is going to give shields to your unit and then eventually do some kind of like damage per stack. At 10 stack, 250 each, it's quite a lot of damage. So this is a very good artifact, but very specific to flying units, of course. And as always, if you have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments below. There's a lot of artifacts in this game, a lot of gameplay, so we're going to make sure to record some of our war footage and use some of these fun teleport and stuff and let you see the true potential that it has. So make sure to subscribe and check out our other Call of Dragons videos and guides in order to help you get the most out of this game. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.